Chapter 1, Static on the Airwaves. The neon on-air sign flickered like a dying star in the corner of the booth. For Elias, a rising star at Baltimore's top radio station, that red glow used to represent victory. Tonight, it felt like a warning light. It was December 20th, and the world outside was covered in a cold, unforgiving sleet. Elias adjusted his headset, his hands trembling slightly. Just an hour ago, he had been handed a termination notice, a restructuring move that prioritized corporate syndication over his local charm. Beside him in the studio sat Sarah, his partner in both life and radio. Her eyes were rimmed with red. They weren't just losing their show, the financial weight of the sudden unemployment meant the house they had just put a deposit on was slipping through their fingers. "We're live in 5, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Elias looked at the stack of Ameliorate 3X shopping bags tucked under the desk, designer wrapping paper and luxury gifts he'd bought yesterday when he thought he was invincible. Now, they felt like shallow relics of a life he couldn't afford. The holiday spirit felt like a cruel joke. He pressed the button, but instead of the smooth jazz intro, a deafening screech of static filled the room. The studio lights began to pulse in time with a rhythmic thumping coming from the basement of the old station building. It wasn't a power surge. It felt like the building was breathing. Chapter 2, The Green-Needled Engine. Down in the bowels of the station, hidden behind a false wall in the archives, stood the evergreen array. Elias, Sarah, and their 3 closest friends, Marcus, Chloe, and Jax, gathered around it. Jax's golden retriever, Buster, growled at the centerpiece, a massive, metallic structure shaped uncannily like a Douglas fir. This was the Christmas tree machine, a prototype Elias's grandfather had obsessed over in the late 90s. It hummed with a low-frequency vibration that rattled Elias's teeth. "It's a temporal stabilizer," Chloe whispered, touching a dial marked 2001. The group was at their lowest point. Marcus had just lost his business, Chloe was facing a health scare. They were a circle of broken dreams wrapped in damp winter coats. Suddenly, a 9th figure emerged from the shadows of the basement. This was Julian, an enigmatic old technician who had worked at the station for 40 years. "The frequency of your lives is off," Julian said, his eyes reflecting the machine's emerald glow. "You think your misery started today? It started on a snowy night in 2001. A single family's tragedy rippled outward, touching all of you. You want to save your futures? You have to go back and ensure that family has the perfect Christmas. But listen well, you cannot change the tragedy. You can only change the spirit." With a roar of ozone and the scent of pine needles, the basement vanished. Chapter 3, The Ghost of Baltimore Past. Elias opened his eyes and gasped. The air was different, it smelled of leaded gasoline and cheap tinsel. He wasn't in the high-tech studio anymore. He was standing on a street corner in Fells Point, Baltimore. A newspaper fluttering in the wind caught his leg, December 21st, 2001. Sarah was there, clutching her thin coat, and Buster was barking at a passing Cadillac that looked ancient by their standards. They were all there, shivering in the shadows of a row house. Across the street, a young girl sat on a stoop, looking dejected. "That's her," Marcus whispered. "That's Maya." Maya was a writer Elias knew from his future, a woman who had spent her life in foster care, never knowing her roots. In their timeline, this was the night she was supposed to be invited to a Baltimore Christmas by her biological family, but a freak accident had caused the letter to be lost in the mail, changing her life's trajectory toward loneliness. "We have to make sure that letter arrives," Elias said, looking at his hands. They looked younger, smoother. "But Julian said we can't interfere directly. If we change the timeline too much, we might never exist." The rough start of their journey was only beginning. They had no money, no identity in this era, and a mission that required them to be guardian angels in a city that didn't know they existed. Chapter 4, The Poverty of Time. The transition to 2001 wasn't just a shift in scenery, it was a sensory assault. The air in Baltimore felt heavier, thick with the scent of coal-fired heaters and the exhaust of older, boxier cars. Elias and his friends stood in an alleyway, their designer clothes from the future looking like alien costumes. The luxury Ameliorate 3X bags Sarah had been holding were gone, replaced by a single, weathered leather satchel containing nothing but a vintage transistor radio and a few crumpled $20 bills from a decade they barely remembered. "We have nothing," Chloe whispered, her breath hitching in the freezing air. "No phones, no GPS, no way to call for help." "We have each other," Jax replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He gripped Buster's collar. The dog was the only one who seemed unfazed, his nose twitching as he caught the scent of a nearby hot dog stand. The group moved toward a flickering neon sign for a motor lodge. The reality of their rough start hit home when they realized they couldn't even check in without a valid 2001 ID. They spent their first night huddled in the back of an abandoned delivery van, the metal floor leaching the warmth from their bones. Elias stayed awake, listening to the crackle of the transistor radio. He heard the younger, cockier voices of the DJs who had preceded him at the station. He felt a pang of jealousy for their ignorance. They didn't know how fragile their world was. As the sun began to rise over the inner harbor, Julian, the mysterious ninth member, appeared at the end of the alley. He didn't look a day younger, despite the 24-year jump. "The letter is at the main sorting facility," he said cryptically. "If it doesn't move tonight, Maya never finds her home. And if she never finds her home, she never writes the book that saves your careers." Chapter 5: The Sorting Sabotage. The mission seemed simple: ensure a letter reached its destination. But as Elias and Marcus scouted the Baltimore mail distribution center, they realized the scale of the fateful night. A massive snowstorm, the Great Blizzard of '01, was beginning to swirl. The facility was in chaos. "If we just hand-deliver it, we break the rules of the machine," Marcus cautioned, his face blue from the cold. Julian said, "We have to preserve the spirit, not rewrite history. The letter has to go through the system. It has to be found by the right person." They watched from a distance as a tired mail clerk tossed a bin of undeliverable mail into a corner. Through his binoculars, Elias saw the crimson seal of the biological family's estate. It was in that bin. If they didn't act, that letter would be shredded by morning. While Sarah and Chloe distracted the security guard by pretending to be stranded travelers, Elias and Jax slipped through a loading bay. The interior of the warehouse was a labyrinth of conveyor belts and roaring machinery. It was loud, dangerous, and smelled of wet paper. Just as Elias reached for the bin, a loud buzzer sounded. A shift change. They were trapped between two rows of sorting machines with nowhere to go. Buster let out a sharp bark, alerting a floor supervisor. Elias felt the familiar sting of failure rising in his throat, the same feeling he'd had when he lost his job. They were out of their depth, stuck in a past that didn't want them, trying to save a future that had already turned its back on them. Chapter 6: The Invisible Hand. They managed to hide inside a hollowed-out shipping crate just as the supervisor walked past. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the falling he had to learn from. He realized that his rising career in the future had been built on ego. Here, he was a ghost, forced to do the right thing without any of the credit. "We can't just grab it," Elias whispered to the group. "We need to cause a lucky accident." Using a long piece of wire Jax found on the floor, they waited until the conveyor belt restarted. As the undeliverable bin was vibrated by the machinery, Elias hooked the edge and tipped it. The mail spilled out, spreading across the floor. A young woman, a seasonal worker with a kind face, sighed and walked over to clean up the mess. She picked up the red-sealed envelope. She paused, looking at the address. "Wait," she muttered. "I know this street. This shouldn't be in the scrap pile." She placed the letter in her personal delivery bag to ensure it went out on the morning truck. The group retreated into the snowy night, exhausted and shivering, but with a spark of hope. They had succeeded in the first step, but the rough part wasn't over. The blizzard was intensifying, and Julian warned them that Maya's family was currently traveling toward Baltimore, straight into a treacherous mountain pass. "The letter gets her there," Julian said, appearing beside them again. "But if their car doesn't make it through the storm, there's no family for her to find. You have to be their lighthouse." Chapter 7: The Mountain's Teeth. The group piled into a rusted 1998 station wagon that Julian had sourced from a long-term parking lot. The heater blew a pathetic stream of lukewarm air, barely putting a dent in the frost creeping across the windshield. As they climbed the winding roads leading toward the outskirts of Baltimore, the blizzard turned the world into a blinding sheet of white. "This is where the records said it happened," Chloe whispered, clutching a crumpled map. A black ice patch on a blind curve. Maya's biological parents and her grandfather were in the car. In the original history, they survived, but the car was totaled, and they missed the window to meet her. They spent years thinking she didn't want to see them. Elias gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The rough start of his own life, the feeling of being unwanted and discarded by his radio station, mirrored the isolation Maya must have felt. He realized now that this wasn't just about a letter, it was about preventing a misunderstanding that would last decades. Suddenly, the headlights caught a flash of metal. A large sedan was fishtailing ahead of them, sliding toward the edge of a steep embankment. "There!" Sarah shouted. Elias didn't think, he slammed on the brakes, feeling the station wagon slide. They had to stop the crash without letting the family see who they really were. Chapter 8, The Human Chain. The sedan had come to a precarious halt, its front tires hanging over the edge of a ravine. Inside, Elias could see 3 terrified faces, a man, a woman, and an elderly gentleman. They were the biological kin Maya had never met. "We can't go over there as a group," Elias commanded. "If they see 5 people and a dog from the future, the shock might cause a different kind of disaster. Jax, Marcus, get the tow cable. Sarah, Chloe, stay back and keep the road blocked so no one else hits them." The wind howled, a predatory sound that threatened to blow them off the ridge. Jax and Elias crawled through the slush, the freezing mud soaking into their jeans. They worked in the shadows, hooking the cable to the sedan's rear axle while the family inside prayed aloud. Just as the car began to slip further, Elias signaled Marcus to floor the station wagon. The cable went taut, screaming under the tension. With a gut-wrenching groan of metal, the sedan was pulled back onto the solid asphalt. Elias stayed in the darkness of the trees, watching as the family stepped out of the car, hugging each other and weeping with relief. They looked around for their saviors, but Elias and the others remained hidden in the swirling snow. They were the anonymous architects of a miracle. Chapter 9, The Ghost in the Radio. As the family drove off safely toward Baltimore, the group huddled back in their car, shivering violently. To keep their spirits up, Jax tinkered with the old transistor radio. He managed to bypass a few circuits, creating a bridge between their current location and the radio station's local transmitter. "Elias," Sarah said softly, "you're a DJ. Talk to them. Not as the man who lost his job, but as the man who knows what Christmas is supposed to feel like." Elias took the small microphone Jax had rigged. His voice, seasoned and deep, cut through the 2001 airwaves, overriding the local signal for just a few miles. "To the travelers on the road tonight," he began, his voice warm despite the cold, "don't let the darkness tell you you're alone. There are people you haven't met yet who love you. There are stories yet to be written. Keep driving. The light is waiting in Baltimore." In the back seat, Julian, the 9th member, smiled. The timeline was pulsing. Elias was no longer mourning his lost career, he was using his gift to shepherd a family toward a reunion. However, the rough beginning wasn't over. As they pulled back into the city limits, they saw the Ameliorate 3X store, the luxury shop that, in their time, represented greed and shallow gift-giving. In 2001, it was just a small, struggling boutique. And standing in front of it, looking lost and cold, was a younger version of the woman who had fired Elias. Chapter 10, The Architect of Alimony. The woman standing in the slush was Victoria Vance. In 2024, she was the cold-blooded executive who had signed Elias's termination papers without looking him in the eye. But here, in the dim light of 2001, she looked devastatingly human. She was staring at the window of Ameliorate 3X, which at this time was a tiny, failing storefront selling handmade journals and local art. "That's her," Sarah whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. "The woman who ruined our lives. Why is she here?" Julian leaned forward from the shadows of the back seat. Before she was a titan of industry, she was a dreamer whose business failed on Christmas Eve. That failure hardened her heart. It turned her into the woman who values spreadsheets over souls. If you want a better future, you have to save the dream she lost. The group looked at their meager surroundings. They were tired, hungry, and broke. To save Victoria's spirit, they would have to use the very thing they lacked, the ameliorate spirit of bettering oneself. They watched as Victoria began to pack a going out of business sign into a cardboard box. The rough start of her bitterness was happening right in front of them. Chapter 11, The Secret Santas. We can't give her money, Marcus noted, looking at their near-empty pockets. But we have skills. And we have the dog. The plan was hatched in the shivering dark. Chloe, who had a background in design, noticed that the shop's display was invisible from the street. Jax and Marcus used their remaining strength to clear the ice and snow from the sidewalk, creating a welcoming path. Meanwhile, Sarah used her gift for persuasion to talk to the local flower girl, trading her last $20 bill for a bundle of wilted evergreens that they could revive. Elias stayed in the shadows, using his voice. He found a local payphone and called the city's most popular 2001 talk show, masquerading as a secret Santa scout. He spoke with such passion about a hidden gem on the corner of 4th and Main, a place where the soul of Baltimore is being sold in the form of a journal, that the DJ promised to send a remote broadcast unit over. Inside the shop, Victoria was stunned as a trickle of customers, then a crowd, began to pour in, spurred by the radio shout-out. She didn't see the 5 strangers and the dog working tirelessly in the alley to fix her broken heater or polish her brass signage. She only felt the sudden, inexplicable warmth of a community that cared. Chapter 12, The Writer's Room. As the sun began to set on December 23rd, the group moved to their final and most important task. They found themselves outside a small, drab apartment building where Maya, the young writer, lived. She had received the letter, the one they had saved from the sorting bin, but she was too afraid to open it. She thinks it's a rejection, Sarah said, watching Maya through the frosted window. She's been in the system so long, she doesn't believe in family anymore. Buster, the golden retriever, played the most crucial role here. Jax let him off the leash. The dog, sensing the girl's loneliness, ran to the door and began to whimper and scratch. When Maya opened the door, she didn't find a threat, she found a wagging tail and a dog that refused to leave her side. As she stepped out to find the dog's owner, she tripped over the red-sealed envelope she had dropped. This time, with Buster nudging her hand, she opened it. Tears streamed down her face as she read the words, "We have been looking for you for 20 years. Please come home for Christmas." Elias watched from the shadows, a lump in his throat. He realized that falling in love wasn't just about him and Sarah, it was about falling in love with the act of being human. The rough edges of his own heart were finally beginning to smooth over. Chapter 13, The Emerald Glitch. The atmosphere in 2001 began to fracture. As the group gathered in the snowy park across from Maya's apartment, the sky didn't just turn dark, it vibrated. Faint lines of emerald light, identical to the needles of the Christmas tree machine, etched themselves across the clouds. The timeline is pushing back, Julian warned, his face etched with deep lines of concern. You've done too much good, too quickly. The universe is trying to reconcile the you that exists here and the you that hasn't been born yet. Suddenly, Marcus's hand began to flicker, turning translucent like a bad television signal. The rough reality of time travel was setting in. They weren't just visitors, they were anomalies. The machine back at the radio station was overheating, struggling to maintain the bridge between 2001 and the future. If the frequency hits 0, Julian said, checking a pocket watch that ran backward, you won't just stay here. You'll be erased. We have 6 hours to get back to the basement, but the blizzard has shut down every road in Baltimore. Chapter 14, The Long Walk Home. With the station wagon buried under 5 feet of snow and the city at a standstill, the group had no choice but to walk. It was 5 miles to the radio station, the distance that felt like a marathon in the sub-zero temperatures. This was the true test of their bond. Elias carried Chloe when her legs gave out, Marcus and Jax took turns shielding Sarah from the wind. Buster stayed at the front, his keen instincts finding the shallowest snowdrifts for them to tread through. The city around them was a ghost town, but through the windows of the row houses, they saw the fruits of their labor. They saw Victoria Vance behind her shop counter, laughing with a customer instead of crying alone. They saw the mail clerk they had helped, heading home with a bonus in her pocket. It was worth it, Elias gasped, his lungs burning from the cold. Even if we don't make it back, we change the frequency of this city. Just as they reached the bridge leading to the station, a massive power transformer exploded nearby. The city went dark. The Christmas tree machine relied on the station's power grid. Without electricity, the portal home was dead. Chapter 15, The Voice in the Dark. They reached the station basement, finding it freezing and silent. The great metallic tree stood cold, its emerald lights extinguished. "We need a jumpstart," Jax shouted over the wind whistling through the vents. "But the grid is down for the whole block." Elias looked at the old emergency backup generator, a hand-cranked relic from the 1950s. It would take more than physical strength to turn it, it required a steady, rhythmic pulse to match the machine's frequency. "Sarah, help me," Elias commanded. As they turned the heavy iron crank together, Elias began to hum, then sing. He used the same vocal resonance he used on the air, the radio voice, that had made him a star. He wasn't just using his muscles, he was pouring his intent, his love for Sarah, and his hope for the future into the machine. The dog began to howl in harmony, and Marcus and Chloe joined in, creating a chorus of voices in the pitch-black basement. Slowly, the base of the machine began to glow. A single, tiny green light flickered on the top branch. "It's not enough," Julian yelled. "We need one more surge. We need a connection to the now." Outside, in the year 2001, the family they had saved, Mia and her biological parents, were driving past the station on their way to their first dinner together. Maya looked up at the station's antenna and felt a strange pull. She whispered a silent "thank you" to the universe. That tiny spark of gratitude traveled down the wire, hitting the machine like a lightning bolt. Chapter 16, The Silent Awakening. The sensation of the return was nothing like the departure. Instead of a roar of ozone, there was a profound, velvet silence. Elias opened his eyes to find himself slumped against the familiar soundboard of the radio booth. The on-air sign wasn't flickering, it was glowing a steady, confident gold. He gasped, looking down at his hands. He was wearing an expensive, tailored wool sweater, but tucked into the pocket was a small, dried pine needle, a souvenir from 2001. Beside him, Sarah was slowly waking up, her eyes wide with wonder. She looked at the desk and let out a soft cry. The termination notice was gone. In its place sat a contract for a nationally syndicated show titled The Heart of the City. But more importantly, the Ameliorate 3X bags, once filled with hollow luxury, were replaced by handmade journals and local crafts. "Elias," Sarah whispered, pointing to a framed photograph on the wall. It wasn't a picture of a celebrity, it was a photo of their core group, Elias, Sarah, Marcus, Chloe, Jax, and Buster, standing in front of a thriving bookstore cafe. The caption read, "Celebrating 20 years of community." They hadn't just saved a family, they had rewritten the foundation of their own lives. Chapter 17, The Transformation of Victoria. A sharp knock at the door made them jump. Victoria Vance walked in. But she wasn't the cold, sharp-edged executive Elias remembered. Her eyes were warm, and she was wearing a scarf that Elias recognized from the little shop in 2001. "Elias, Sarah," she said, her voice full of genuine affection. "I just wanted to check in. I know the holidays can be a lot, especially with the expansion of the Ameliorate Foundation. I never forget that it was your radio broadcast years ago that kept my first little shop alive during the blizzard. You two are the soul of this company." Elias realized that by saving her dream in the past, they had prevented her from ever becoming the woman who would fire them. She was now a philanthropist, using her wealth to fund foster care initiatives and local arts. "By the way," Victoria added, pausing at the door. "We have a guest in the lobby. She's the author we're sponsoring for the Christmas gala. She says she feels like she's known you both her whole life." Chapter 18, The Writers' Reunion. They walked into the lobby and saw her. Maya was no longer the lonely girl on the stoop. She was a poised, radiant woman, holding a copy of her best-selling memoir, The Letter That Found Me. When Maya saw Elias, she froze. She didn't recognize him from 2001, he had been a shadow in the snow, but she recognized the frequency of his presence. She walked over and hugged him, a deep, soul-level embrace that felt like the closing of a circle. "I don't know why," Maya whispered, "but every time I hear your voice on the radio, I feel like I'm home. Thank you for being my lighthouse." Behind her stood a tall, elderly man and a woman, her biological parents. They had lived a full, happy life together because of a tow cable and a lucky accident on a mountain pass. The rough beginning of the story had been completely smoothed away, replaced by a tapestry of connections that spanned decades. Jax entered the lobby with Buster, who immediately ran to Maya. The dog wagged his tail as if no time had passed at all. Julian, the 9th member, was nowhere to be seen, but a small, emerald-shaped pin was pinned to the lobby's massive Christmas tree, glowing with a light that didn't come from any bulb. Chapter 19, The Gala of Gratitude. The night of the Christmas Gala at the Baltimore Museum of Industry was a far cry from the cold, desperate alleyways of 2001. The room was bathed in a warm, golden glow, and the scent of fresh pine and spiced cider filled the air. This was the greatest Christmas ever, not because of the luxury, but because every person in the room was connected by a thread of repurposed fate. Elias stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd. He saw Marcus, now a successful mentor for small businesses, Chloe, healthy and vibrant, and Sarah, the woman he had learned to love all over again through the trials of time. He took the microphone, but his voice didn't shake this time. 24 years ago, Elias began, his voice broadcasting live to the entire city. A group of friends got lost in a storm. We thought we had lost everything, our jobs, our security, our hope. But we learned that the value of a life isn't measured by what you keep, but by what you give away when you think you have nothing left. As he spoke, he saw Victoria Vance sitting at a table with Maya and her family. They were laughing, sharing stories of a blizzard long ago. Elias realized that the Ameliorate 3X brand had become a symbol of restoration. The designer wrapping paper now adorned gifts for children in foster care, and the luxury bags were filled with essentials for those still walking through their own rough beginnings. Chapter 20, The Final Frequency. After the gala, the group of 5 friends, the dog, and the mysterious Julian returned to the basement of the radio station one last time. The Christmas tree machine stood silent, its metallic branches shimmering under the dim basement lights. "The loop is closed," Julian said, his voice sounding thinner, as if he were becoming part of the shadows. "The frequency has stabilized. This machine was never meant to be a permanent bridge, it was a tuning fork. It brought you back into alignment with who you were always meant to be." With a final, gentle hum, the emerald lights on the machine began to fade. One by one, the mechanical needles retracted, and the great, evergreen array folded in on itself until it was nothing more than an antique radio console, dusty and silent. Julian was gone, leaving only the scent of pine and a small, handwritten note on the console, "Keep the signal clear." The group walked out of the station into the crisp Baltimore night. A gentle snow began to fall, the kind of snow that invites you to stay a while, rather than the kind that forces you to run. "So," Sarah said, slipping her hand into Elias's as they walked toward their home, a home they now owned, built on the foundation of their shared adventure. "What do we do now?" Elias looked up at the stars, hearing the faint echo of a 2001 radio broadcast in his mind, then looked at the bright, hopeful faces of his friends. "We stay in love," he said firmly. "And we make sure the music never stops." As they disappeared into the night, Buster gave one final, happy bark, and the on-air sign above the station glowed brighter than ever, signaling to the world that the message of Christmas was finally, perfectly, in tune.